Joining us now to discuss the concerns with AI is Miles Taylor, former DHS Chief of Staff of the Trump administration and Chief Policy Officer at the Future U.S. and a good friend to us. Okay, Miles, to the untrained ear, these deepfakes can be pretty convincing. My producer told me which ones were real and which ones were fake. Can you tell?
Well, Alex, I'm going to take a guess. I think it was the first one in each of those cases. But here's the thing: is in some instances, I think the first one of each was fake. You tell me.
Yeah, you're right.
All right. But here's the thing, Alex, is you can make these absolutely indistinguishable from reality.
Oh, yeah.
And as you know, we've been running war games on this for the past year with election officials and federal officials to do exactly that, to show them what you just showed viewers, that it will be very difficult to distinguish not just between candidates' voices that are real and fake, but maybe even local election officials. In fact, Alex, this week, Adrian Fontes, who's the head election official, the Secretary of State in one of the main swing states, Arizona, said this is his #1 concern, is the possibility that there will be false information disseminated with deepfakes, and it will be really, really hard to debunk. So we're certainly worried about that in the run-up to Election Day.
So, look, we know creators with malicious intent, they likely target people who wouldn't be able to tell the difference, and it's hard to do. Is there any regulation the federal government should be pushing to combat this, or does it fall to just fact checkers and to experts like you to try to debunk them?
Well, unfortunately, Alex, there were efforts in Congress to try to get a bipartisan bill passed to make it a lot harder for people to use deepfakes in an election context. In fact, it had strange bedfellows. Democrat Amy Klobuchar in the Senate and Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican, had teamed up on a bill that looked like it was close to the finish line, and it would have made it illegal for actors to essentially mimic a candidate that's running in a federal election. But that didn't pass in time. And so, look, now what authorities have to do is balance, of course, between First Amendment protected speech and people who might be using deepfakes to break the law. So let me give you an example. You have a right, Alex, to create a deepfake of me if you want as a parody and put it on the internet. But what you don't have the right to do is create a deepfake of me saying that the election has been delayed in an effort to suppress the vote, because that would be illegal voter suppression. So that's what authorities are looking out for. They're looking out for usage of these deepfakes that's intentionally designed to deprive people of their democratic rights. But that's going to be hard to do. Why? Because there's tons of this stuff on the web.
And look, we saw criminal charges filed, Miles, when a deepfake robocall of President Biden, you remember this, it went out before the New Hampshire primary earlier this year. Does the audio have to have some sort of call to action before officials can act on it? I mean, you're saying I could make a deepfake of you. Does it have to have some malicious intent when it comes to elections?
Well, I mean, look, that's a great example, because in that instance, the individual who created that deepfake was not only posing as Joe Biden, but providing voters with false information about that election. But there's some nuance here. But there's another category, Alex, that authorities are going to be looking at, which is people trying to raise money off of this. So you see these scam PACs, these super PACs popping up to try to raise money for one candidate or the other that might be using deepfakes to further raising those funds. That would fall in the category of fraud, because they're not actually those individuals, and they are trying to create an effect by raising money. So there are hooks here for authorities to be able to knock back this behavior. But the concern that officials I speak to have is that they won't be able to keep up. And we've talked, Alex, about that October surprise, something happening before the election where voters are told maybe incorrect information about where and how to vote. But I'm also concerned about the November surprise, which is that after the election results are tallied, that people might disseminate deepfakes to try to claim the election was stolen. Fake images of people stuffing ballots, fake images of corruption at polling places. And that is going to be very, very hard to disprove in the immediate wake of what is very likely to be a contentious vote.
Pretty scary scenario you're painting there. Let me ask you one more question. This is a somewhat scary scenario as well, because I want to talk about this. It's been the focus of significant legal concern, the Doomsday Book. It's a set of legal documents kept in a SCIF in the White House detailing the secret and extraordinary powers that a president could use in a time of massive catastrophe. Did Donald Trump ever inquire about the Doomsday Book? I mean, why are you worried that it would be even more dangerous if he got his hands on it in a second term?
Well, Alex, there's only so much I can say on this front because, of course, it's a closely guarded set of break glass in case of emergency procedures for a president. But DHS gave me clearance in my book I released last year to talk about concerns here. And the most immediate was we were within days at the end of the Trump administration of one of his MAGA allies being forced into the job on the National Security Council that would have overseen this book. Again, these extraordinary presidential powers that allegedly, according to open source reports, allow a president to do things like cut off internet access and shut down companies and do extraordinary things if the country is under threat. The worry of officials at the time at the National Security Council is that Trump would have used those powers in nefarious ways to prevent the transfer of power to Joe Biden. Here's the thing. He's now very much aware of what those powers were. And I think the fear is in a second term that someone who's willing to execute Donald Trump's political aims and misusing national security powers will obtain that book, will obtain those authorities, and propose to Donald Trump that they be used in ways to further his personal interests instead of the national interests. And there's now a number of people speaking out about that. People whose job it was to protect the Doomsday Book now are very concerned about a second term of Donald Trump.
I thank you for sharing that. Very sobering, but I appreciate you sharing what you could, my friend. Thank you, Miles Taylor.